Hello and welcome to the Absolute Beginner Guitar Lesson Series. My name is Oliver and today's lesson is lesson number 32. And today's lesson is a whiteboard lesson, so I suggest you get out a piece of paper and something to write with just in case you want to take some notes. But other than that, let's get into it. So today's lesson is on minor scales. And before we go any further, I should point out that there are several types of minor scales. So there's a little bit more complexity on the minor side than there is on the major side. But there are several types of minor scales, and the one we're going to look at today is what I was taught to as the natural minor scale. Now, this also, I've seen this referred to as the pure minor scale, and also I've seen it referred to as the Aeolian mode. But the point is, this is the first minor scale that people usually work with, and it's used a lot. So we're going to take a look at this one. So we picked the minor scale that I picked was the A minor scale, and the reason that I chose A minor is because this scale has no sharps or flats in it. So sort of similar to the C major scale, only we have a minor scale here and it has no sharps or flats, and the notes are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, which makes it very easy to remember. Start at the beginning of the alphabet, go through the alphabet till you come back to A. So anyway, this is our scale. So I have the notes of the scale numbered, and A is the root note of the scale. So I'm going to go ahead and just write that in there. And also this A here is an octave to the root. Remember, octaves can be, they're relative. It can be higher or it can be lower. But this note here is an octave higher than this A that I'm calling the root note. And also that this note A here is the same as the root note. So we could use the number 1 to indicate it. But it's also the 8th note in our scale that we have written here. So if we wanted to, we could use the number 8 as well. I think my marker is starting to crap out, so let me see if I can find something a little better here. So anyway, this could be referred to as 1 or 8. So now we have our A minor scale. And for anyone who is not familiar with scales, scale tone chords, or keys, I suggest you go back and you watch lesson number 3. We introduced the major scale and we learned about scale tone chords and quite a few other things in the lesson. So if you're not familiar with these concepts, you may want to go back and watch lesson number 3. And also lesson number 29 is a good lesson to go back and watch too as well, because we're going to touch on some of the stuff in there. But anyway, let's keep going. So we have our scale, and like the major scale, we can generate a set of scale tone chords. And the method that we use to do this is the same method we use for the major scale. So we have our root note here. If we want to derive a chord based on the root note A, we can derive a 3-note chord by starting with A, and then we're going to skip over the B, so we have C, and then we're going to skip over the D, and we have E. So now we have an A chord. And we can do this with every note of the scale. We start with the B, we do the same thing, skip over the D, or C, excuse me, take the D, skip over the E, and take the F note. So now we have our B chord. And hold on a second here. I'm just gonna push this down a little bit. Sorry about that. But anyway, using this method, we can derive a 3-note chord based on every note of the scale. And the chords use other notes that are in the scale. And these chords that I'm deriving using this method are what's known as the scale tone chords. I don't know why, I always seem to write uphill. But anyway, I'm just finishing this up right here. So now we have a set of chords, and each chord is based on a particular note of the scale. And these are the scale tone chords. And for anyone not familiar with the concept, we have a minor scale, which is a series of notes, and we have a series of chords that we've generated using these notes. And these notes of the scale, along with the melodies we can create using the notes of the scale, and along with the different ways we can arrange the chords to make songs, makes up what's known as the key of A minor. So this is what we have here. We have the key of A minor. And so anyway, I'm just gonna sort of erase this out of here because I don't want to get too much stuff on the board. But as you can see, we can generate a series of 3-note chords from the notes of the scale. And the names of the chords, the A chord is A minor, and the B chord is B diminished. The C chord is C major. The D chord is D minor. The E chord is E minor. The F chord is F major. And the G chord is G major. So these are our scale tone chords. And for anyone who's familiar with major scales and the scale tone chords of major scales, you'll notice that the order of the chords is different. We have a minor scale, so the root note is A, and the 1 chord will be a minor chord, because now we're dealing with a minor key. So we have the 1 chord as a minor chord, in this case A. We also have the 4 chord as a minor chord, and we have the 5 chord as the minor chord. So these are our 3 minor chords. It's sort of similar to when we're dealing with a major key, where the 1, 4, and 5 chords are major. We have the 1, 4, and 5 chords here minor, in a minor key. And we have 3 major chords. However, the major chords are now the chord that represents the 3rd note of the scale, the 6th note of the scale, and the 7th note of the scale. And finally, we have our diminished chord, which represents the 2nd note of the scale. So as you can see, we have major chords, we have three minor chords, 3 major chords, and we have a diminished chord. And this is sort of the same as when we're dealing with a major key, but the difference is the chords are in different places as far as the numbers are concerned. So that's the first thing you want to sort of get around your head, is that when you're dealing with scale tone chords in a minor key, in this case, the key of A minor, the 1, 4, and 5 chords are now minor. And the 3, 6, and 7 chords are major. And the 2 chord is diminished. So this is what happens when we generate our triads, our 3-note chords. But we can also generate a series of 4-note chords. And the way we do that is very similar to the way we generated the 3-note chords. The only difference is we start with our A, skip over this B and take the C, skip over this D and take this E, and those are the same notes of the chord we just derived. But now what we're going to do is we're going to continue, and we're going to skip over this F and we're going to take the G. So now we have a 4-note chord, and we can do this for every note of the scale, ultimately generating a set of 4-note chords. Now that we have 4-note chords, the names of the chords will change, and the chord associated with the number 1 will be a minor 7th chord. The chord associated with 2 will be a half diminished chord. The chord associated with 3 will be a major chord. 4 will be a minor chord. 5, major 7th and minor 7th chords. The chord associated with the 5 will be a minor 7th chord. The chord associated with 6 will be a major 7th chord. And finally, the chord that is associated with the 7th note of the scale will be a dominant 7th chord. So for anyone who's not familiar with these chord types, I would suggest that you go back and watch lesson number 29, where we introduce the 4-note chords and sort of go into a little bit more depth on this. But anyway, now what I want to point out is that you notice our 7 chord is the dominant 7th chord. So we have an A minor scale, and when we're dealing with the minor scale, the natural minor scale, the note that is associated with the 7th note of the scale is known as the dominant. So that's why when we generate our 4-note chord, it's called the dominant 7th chord. So now we have a set of 4-note chords that we can use to make music in a minor key. So now that we've sort of introduced this basic information, I'd like to take a little bit closer of a look at how this scale is constructed. And I'm going to just erase some of this stuff out of here. And what I want to do here now is I'd like to do an analysis of this scale. And what I want to analyze is the interval sequence for the scale. So just take that out. And it starts with the A note. And A is the root note. So I'm going to write an R here. And the next note of the scale is B. Well, the interval from the A note to the B note is a whole step. And I'm going to write that with a W. And from B to C, we have an interval of a half step. From C to D, the interval is a whole step. From D to E, we have another whole step. From E to F, we have a half step. From F to G, we have a whole step. And finally, from this G to our octave A, we have a whole step. So now what we've revealed is the interval sequence. And this is actually the formula for a minor scale. If we start with a root note and then we follow this sequence and we go a whole step, half step, 2 more whole steps, or a half step, and then finish up with 2 whole steps, we will have a minor scale. And for anyone who's not familiar with the concept of intervals, you may want to go and watch lesson number 2. And also, in lesson number 8, we talked about how you can construct scales. But my point is that if you know how to follow the interval sequence, you can derive or create your own minor scales. And I encourage anyone to do this, especially if anyone has followed through these lessons and they know the material that was presented in the earlier lessons. I definitely would suggest to them that they start to work on writing out some minor scales, because writing out scales actually helps you to learn the scale. And also, if you have a set of notes, if you have your scale, you can generate your scale tone chords. And if you know the rules, then you can give your chords their names. So this is a very important sequence to memorize, along with the sequence that that we learned for the major scale. So I'm just going to take this out of here right now. So there's really only one more thing that I want to look at. And what I'd like to do is, just take a look at this scale. We have a A minor scale, and we have no sharps or flats in it. Now, some of you may be familiar with the C major scale. And I just want to write out a C major scale here. C, D, I apologize for this writing, F, G, A, B, and we have an octave. Well, if we look at these two scales, they both contain the same exact notes. The only difference is the note order is different. We start on A here, but if we when we start here, it's sort of like picking up the scale from the C. So these two scales have exactly the same notes. And what I'd like to tell you is that the A minor scale is what's known as a relative minor scale. And what that means is this. And I'm just going to take this out of here. If we have a major scale, such as C major, well, first let me tell you, for every major scale, there is a minor scale that contains exactly the same notes. And the minor scale is called the relative minor to the major scale. So we have a C major scale here. And I want to direct your attention to the A note. And the A note is the sixth note of the scale. And the way the rule works is that if you have a major scale, the sixth note of the major scale that you have is the root note of the relative minor scale. And the relative minor scale has exactly the same notes in it. Sorry about that scale not being the same. But in terms of the notes of the scale, they're exactly the same. So this is an important thing to understand. And I apologize for my writing. It's not very good today. But I just want to show you that we could do this with any major scale. So if I have a G major scale, and I number the notes of the scale, the note that is the sixth note of the scale, which in this case is now E, becomes the root note to the relative minor scale, which is E minor. And it has exactly the same notes in it as the G major scale. So this is a very important thing to sort of recognize and understand, because what it really means is that, and I'm just going to get back to our A minor scale. What this really means is, for every major scale you know, there's a minor scale that you also know. Now, the trick is to understanding which scale is the minor scale that's the relative scale. And again, if you're starting with a major scale, all you need to do is pick the sixth note of the major scale, and that will tell you what the relative minor scale is. And also, if you start with a minor scale, I guess C is what I'd call the relative major scale to this A minor. So, and that can be found with the third note of the scale. So if you have a minor scale, let me just write the C in here one more time. Maybe I can line the letters up a little bit better this time. And what I was saying is, if you have a major scale, the sixth note of the scale becomes the root note of the minor, relative minor scale. And if you have a minor scale, the third note of the minor scale is the root note to the relative major scale. So what you can do is, if you know any major scales at all, you now can learn the minor scales. But you must remember that when we're dealing with the minor scale, the rules are a little bit different. And the 1 chord is the minor chord, the 4 chord is minor, and the 5 chord are minor. And now the 3 chord, the 6 chord, and the 7 chord are the major chords, and 2 is the diminished chord. And of course, if we move these and we go with 4-note chords, in the case of 4-note chords, the minor chords become minor 7th chords. The C major becomes a major 7th. The F major becomes a major 7th. And the G major becomes a dominant 7th, because G is the dominant note. Because in a minor scale, the 7th note is the dominant note. Whoops, I don't know why I wrote G there. Should write dominant. And this chord, the 2 chord, is now becomes the half diminished. So that's about it for the lesson. Just wanted to kind of show you how minor scales are created, the natural minor scale, and also to sort of show you how we can derive scale tone chords with minor scales. And the chords the triads are still major, minor, and diminished. However, when you compare a minor scale with a major scale and you compare scale tone chords, the position of the major and minor chords is different. So a little bit of time and study with the minor scale is definitely helpful. But if you have your set of scale tone chords, now you're ready to start playing in a minor key. And now the chord progressions aren't exactly the same in a minor key, but you're going to be basing your song on the A minor chord. And from there, you can experiment around with the other chords to sort of see what works well. And I would start, for those of you who are familiar with playing through scale tone chords, now you can start playing through your scale tone chords in the key of A minor. And anyone who's gone through these lessons knows how to find all of these chords. And we can sort of set them up, and you can sort of play them through with the root notes on a specific string, or you can try to put them together and sort of voice them to where you're blending your root notes on different strings. But basically all the same things that we've done with the major scales, we can start doing with the minor scales. So put in your time, put in your work, and I hope to see you at the next lesson. Peace.